Karen Duke, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at Middlesex University. I just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to you all. This is the first webinar in our series for 2021. We've got two more scheduled in, one in February and one in March. Just a few things around housekeeping. If you wouldn't mind, I think you all do. You've all got your mics off and your camera off. This will just allow us to get the best sort of sound and presentation for today. We'd also encourage you to use the Q&A function as Katie is presenting, if you've got comments or if you've got questions that you want to ask her at the end, and then we'll take those up at the end. What Christiana and I thought we would do is we would try to open it up to a discussion where people are asking live questions at the end. So we will try that as well, so people can come online and we can discuss in person, which is a bit nicer than just doing it on the sort of Q&A sort of function on Zoom. And we will be recording the session, and this will be placed on the Drug and Alcohol Research Centre website so that you can download it later, or you can share it with colleagues. So the final thing for me to do is to introduce Dr. Katie Anderson. It's a real pleasure to have her here today to discuss her research on looking at couples who use MDMA together. And she's a lecturer in psychology at Middlesex with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Katie, to present. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Karen. Just to check that when you see the screen that I'm sharing, is there like a pop-up, like a Zoom pop-up that you can still see there? Or is that like okay? Maybe it's fine. Just something that I can see on my screen, but yeah, maybe that's okay.
The people, just hold on, Katie, everybody's saying that there isn't anything there. It looks fine. Okay. So everything's cool.
Fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. It's just my screen. Okay, great. No worries. All right. Thank you, Karen. And thank you to Karen and the other directors, co-directors of the Research Centre, Betsy and Rachel, for inviting me to present today. I really appreciate it. So as Karen said, I'm Katie, I'm a lecturer at Middlesex, and I'm going to be talking you through today some of the findings from my doctoral research. So first, I'll talk about the kind of context to the research, why I performed it, and how I performed the research as well. I'll then discuss what I found and what this might mean for policy and practice. But first, I'd just like to give a quick kind of shout out to my supervisory team, Professor Paula Reevy and Dr. Zoe Bowden. They were honestly the best supervisors anyone could have asked for. So this is the story we all know about MDMA. It's a psychoactive substance, better known as ecstasy, Molly, Mandy, and about a million other different things as well. It makes people feel energetic, euphoric, and sociable. Studies have also claimed that MDMA is neurotoxic and can produce cognitive deficits as well. But it's been associated with the rave scene for so long, and the roots of why MDMA was first used and valued have been lost. So before MDMA was ecstasy, it was empathy. It was first used by therapists in the 1970s, largely in the US, for individuals and couple therapy as well. And it was used because of its kind of particular collection of effects. So it reduces the fear response, it provides a sense of calm, gives the person taking it an increased sense of trust with others as well. And these really help to kind of facilitate talking about quite difficult and traumatic experiences. It then got rebranded as ecstasy in the 80s for the club scene, and then was made illegal in about 1985 in the States. And the therapeutic use of MDMA has been revived in the last decade or so in controlled trials, and these are mainly looking at MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. So there is a body of research that explores the effects MDMA has on closeness and intimacy. And much of this is qualitative in nature. So the first study that was ever performed looking at MDMA and its impact on interpersonal relationships was performed by Beck and Rosenbaum. They found that people initially took MDMA to get high, but then they carried on using it for its bonding effects and the fact that they described it as therapeutic. Now, obviously there's a big difference between actual therapeutic use of MDMA and people describing their use as therapeutic. But it definitely says something about the way people are perceiving their experiences on this drug. Young men on MDMA seem to be more emotionally expressive, they seem to be more physically affectionate. And these kind of bonding effects of MDMA also seem to last long beyond the drug experience itself, solidifying friendships in the long term as well. So there is a real variety of prosocial effects of MDMA, some of which I've already spoken about, increased empathy, sociability, a sense of closeness. And these effects have been found both in recreational studies and under controlled conditions as well. So research really shows how MDMA can increase intimacy between people. But much of this research that's already been done focuses on friendships. And there's very, very little research on one of our kind of closest relationships, our romantic ones. So Greer and Tolbert made this statement over 30 years ago now, yet we have made such little headway in kind of examining the merits of this statement that the single best use of MDMA is to facilitate more direct communication between people involved in a significant relationship. In their therapeutic study of MDMA use, so they're both therapists, and they performed this study before MDMA was made illegal in the States. And they found that 28 out of 29 of their participants reported improvements in their relationships in the days, kind of weeks, even months after taking MDMA. But how would this increased intimacy, these improvements in relationships, prosocial effects, how would this manifest in one of our most significant relationships, the one we have with our partner? This is a question I kept coming back to. And there is such little research on MDMA and couple relationships. Still today, I think only 3 that I'm aware of, and they offer a very mixed picture. So our study really aimed to address this knowledge gap on the use of MDMA by couples and the meaning of that use to these couples as well. So this led us to explore 2 research questions. How do couples experience closeness and intimacy in their everyday lives and their ecstasy experiences? How do people understand their relationship as influenced by their MDMA use? And when we explored our research questions, we did so using 2 main theories. So there's psychosocial process theory, which sees experience as contextualized and interconnected. And it really alerts us to the process of encounters that lead to a drug experience. So kind of thinking about biographical experience, and also to the other things that drug experiences are related to. So thinking about spaces, other people, psychological experience, bodily experience as well. And the practices approach to intimacy, this is the second theory that we really strongly drew on. And this defines intimacy as the things people do and feel to create a special sense of closeness. And this can include everything from spending time together, cracking jokes, even making a cup of tea. And the practice's approach to intimacy claims that we cannot capture a kind of universal definition of what intimacy is. Rather, we must look to how couples are doing intimacy in their everyday lives together. So we chose a qualitative methodology. It felt most appropriate because there wasn't that much research out there. It was a very exploratory study. And we're really interested in meaning making as well. I performed a couple interviews for the first study as I was interested in MDMA's effects for the couple. So I wanted to treat the couple as the unit of analysis. And it's also provided an opportunity to witness dynamics in action. So couples can kind of, you can see how they are together, and they can also kind of disagree with each other or kind of elaborate on what the other person has said, which produce some really rich accounts. I also use visual methods in these couple interviews, which I think worked really well. Ask couples to bring in 5 objects or photos, and each object represented a different MDMA experience. And this really grounds the interview in specific experience rather than kind of generalized talk about MDMA use, and also gives the couples something to speak through and to, so kind of created some more comfort in the interviews. So in the second study for this PhD, I asked participants to keep a written diary for a week around the time they were next taking MDMA with their partner. So individuals took part in this study, and everyone who took part in the written diaries was different from people who took part in the couple interviews as well. And these diaries seem to provide kind of more an outlet for more sort of sensitive information that they might not want to share kind of face-to-face with a researcher. And in practice, I really found that the couple interviews provided more of a kind of overview of the relationship, often a little bit more romanticized, versus the diaries, which are a bit more of the kind of, you know, like day-to-day mundane stuff that went on before and after they took MDMA. And the two do work very nicely together for that reason. So there are 28 participants that I recruited in total with a good age range. They're from Europe, all over Europe and the US as well. And of course the UK. People used MDMA in a variety of contexts. You know, MDMA is, as I was saying before, so associated with the rave scene, and indeed, like most of my participants had used MDMA in that kind of context. But almost as many had also used it at home, and then some had used it outside. These are not one-to-one, these figures. So they were all recruited 2015, 2016, which feels like a very long time ago now. But I'm interested, whenever I talk about recruitment, I'm always asked by people, Katie, like, where did you find these people? As if people who use drugs live under a rock somewhere. But the answer is mainly online. So 22 through advertising, most of that was online. Reddit is a great resource I found for recruiting people. It's an online discussion forum, and various harm reduction websites as well. And a few recorded through kind of word of mouth snowballing. So I could talk for hours about the research findings, but I only have about 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to talk through some highlights from each theme. So the first theme, the emotional bubble on MDMA, which seemed to increase communication and emotional connection for couples. Second theme, the use of MDMA combined with certain kinds of spaces and settings produce new ways of experiencing the world. And then finally, with boundaries, couples seem to construct boundaries around their MDMA use to keep it separate from everyday life and other people. So imagine you feel safe and you have no fear. You can say what you want and you're not scared about how someone else will react. You're more in touch with how you feel and you know what your partner is feeling too. There's also an abundance of positive feelings like love. If you were with a partner in this space, what would this make possible? And this is the safe emotional haven of MDMA my participants described, which I call the emotional bubble. and which transforms how couples communicated with one another. So the meeting of fear and abundance of positive emotion in this bubble seemed to create an environment where many disclosures were made between couples. They shared their positive feelings, saying how much they loved each other or different commitments they were going to make to each other. So here, Clara's boyfriend at the time was talking about marriage for the first time on MDMA. And then when I interviewed them, they were engaged. There was also the sharing of past traumas. Carl here talks about sharing a very traumatic experience with his partner. So he was in a car crash and one of his close friends had died. And he speaks about how, he was stuck with this experience, but when he told his partner about it, which he'd never been able to do before, he lost a lot of weight on his shoulders. Right? So he told her on MDMA when they were taking MDMA together. And he says, his nightmares pretty much stopped after that point. And partners also shared kind of distressing childhood memories and difficult family relationships as well. That was quite common. But occasionally these disclosures could be felt as kind of too much. And Sam mentions revealing a kind of personal secret to his girlfriend. And then when he reflected about it afterwards, he seemed to kind of regret telling her, feeling like he didn't really need to get it off his chest. So here is a really interesting example of a disclosure one couple made on MDMA and what happened afterwards. So to give you a bit of background to this extract, so Dan and Emily, this is from a couple interview, and they were telling me about how they had both revealed on MDMA that they had been unfaithful to each other. So the muting of negative emotion and, again, amplification of positive emotion in the bubble can really be seen in the description Dan gives of this protective barrier forming around him. This protective barrier shields him from his own anxiety about someone's reaction to things. And he really floats in a warm tub of warm goo. Always love that image. Totally at ease. Slightly fetal image almost. And in this state, Dan can say anything, right? Things that you wouldn't say otherwise, irrespective of how close him and his partner are. And it also seems apparent that kind of everyday ways of relating are not always conducive to this level of honesty. The worry he feels over Emily's response inhibits his disclosures. However, he feels MDMA can provide this kind of open and honest space where everything is out there between them. Now, this is not to say that the bubble is idyllic. Emily, Dan's partner, she elsewhere comments that she felt safe during this conversation, but didn't make her feel great. And as Dan notes, the MDMA wears off, but that shit's still all out there. The protective casing does wear away. And indeed, these revelations led to painful consequences, distress and turbulence in the days after this came out, and then the couple had a year-long separation as well. Yeah, Dan still seems to frame this as part of a wider process of moving forward for the couple in an honest way. So we can see how the kind of therapeutic feel of MDMA seems to develop organically and is not pre-planned as such. So we were just partying, it turned into a therapy session. And how what couples learnt on MDMA seemed to last after the drug's effects had worn off. So Helena here discusses how, at first they needed MDMA to talk about stuff, and then afterwards it felt like they could bring up those issues without MDMA. MDMA is also not a kind of magic pill for a relationship. As Mark says, the first couple of times he thought, oh, that's just brilliant, that's just solved all our problems. But actually what MDMA does, it just gets the ball rolling. And Mark seems to draw on the idea here of relationships as work, when he says you have to work after the fact to really make it happen. And this idea of relationships as work is everywhere in our society. Just watch Married at First Sight or anything similar to that. And it really offers that idea offers a counterbalance to this emotional idyll of MDMA, I would argue. The idea of relationships involving work primes Mark for having to actively deal with the emotional aftermath of MDMA rather than simply romanticizing its potential for his relationship. So emotional attunement is where you share in someone else's emotional experience and respond sensitively to that experience. And this has been linked with relationship satisfaction in couples. So couples were emotionally attuned to each other on MDMA in a way that was quite striking. And I think key to really understanding the significance of this was gender. Now, according to research, women tend to perform much more emotion work, the practice of being emotionally sensitive and supportive to others than men. And men generally express their emotions less than women. But it's a difference in expression rather than feeling of the emotion. And we can see here how Mark might be an extreme example of this kind of gendered split. He says he doesn't have much empathy in everyday life and he doesn't express emotion very well. Yet on MDMA, he seems to experience another level of felt emotional understanding. He kind of gets what Jenny's saying as opposed to just thinking about it. And this wasn't just a one-way street. Jenny also comes to recognize that Mark, he just simply expresses his emotions in a different way. He's not closing her off. And this had previously been a source of quite a lot of turmoil in their relationship. Her feeling like he's closing her off, him kind of feeling like he doesn't want to express himself in that way. So yeah, that also kind of contextualizes why they might have found this experience so valuable. I think this is significant, especially because kind of lack of emotional intimacy is really given as a key reason for why couples separate. And MDMA does seem to unlock a kind of new emotional understanding for some male partners that is perhaps much harder to access day to day due to some of our ingrained cultural scripts about how men and women should be. Now, it's important to recognize that this wasn't the only story told. Other couples didn't gender emotions in this same way, but gender did seem to be a significant factor for many of the couples and did help explain the value of these experiences of emotional attunement on MDMA. So what I mean by subjectivity for our second theme. So process theory understands subjectivity as something which is always, always evolving and co-constituted with the environment. So thinks about feelings, memories, perceptions as kind of inseparable from the circumstances which prompt them. And that's rather a long-winded way of saying that the environmental setting is crucial to help people experience the drug. And we see here how the spaces of MDMA kind of produce a more playful subjectivity. So on MDMA, as couples moved through kind of urban, natural, and home settings as well, their attention was diverted by objects and other material features of the spaces, which they would kind of stop to explore. Mark and Jenny recount walking around the city, encountering various fun outdoor stuff. There is a real sense of playful exploration as they seamlessly move from one thing to another, kind of magnified by how spontaneous each discovery is. They just kept finding things. And this kind of playfulness, where the focus is much more on the kind of pure fun of the moment than any results you might expect, is further showcased by how they didn't know how to play piano, but they were playing piano, and the humor with which the story is retold. It's interesting to note that so researchers found that couples who take part in a novel, exciting activity together have been shown to express and experience more kind of relationship satisfaction than couples who did something familiar and enjoyable together. In a similar way to Mark and Jenny, Eva's attention is captured by different features of the material world she encounters. And this retelling is full of kind of childlike silliness as she adopts a new best friend for the evening, riffing off of the trope of how everyone on MDMA becomes your best friend. But rather than a person being her new friend, it's a chestnut, flower, or a branch as they kind of wander through this outdoor landscape. But there could also be a darker side to this playfulness. Leanne and Matt's playfulness seems to go awry, and actually later in the interview they tell me how this incident kind of ended up contributing to a rift with their housemates. So again, the focus on finding new things, going through their possessions, gives a real exploratory sense to their experience, that they are more contained because they're in their house at this point, whereas the other two couples were outside. They also are kind of imbued with this same childlike silliness, trying to outdo each other and finding faces that would be funny to smoke. At first, they start with books, then magazines, before hitting upon a tenner and smoking that too. But in fact, this money had been promised to one of their housemates the next day to go to work, and by smoking it and this kind of playful binge on MDMA, they caused a big argument with their friend, which contributed to the erosion of that friendship. So in these accounts, we can see how couples have fun on MDMA together. The material features of the space produce a novel, exciting landscape of adventure for couples. Moments of silliness and childlike exuberance kind of shape and refresh their connection to one another. So earlier we saw how the emotional bubble of MDMA felt quite organic, free-flowing, but now we see how the experience is actually more carefully managed by couples than it might first appear. So partners constructed boundaries around MDMA experiences, separating them from kind of humdrum of everyday life. And Carrie here seems to perform a secular ritual of purification, defined by Mary Douglas as involving separating, tidying, and purifying. We can see this. She purifies her body and mind. She ate healthier. We've taken a nap, done some yoga, some meditation. She tidies her home. The house is clean. The bed should be made. And she separates out this experience as well. You know, set the scene where we can be together without anything else that disturbs us. And she really creates a space separate from the mental noise and circumstances of everyday life, so the couple can better open up their empathy and their understanding to one another. And I just love the way of her talking about, you know, all the preparation she does, the cleaning of the flat, the, you know, making the bed, the yoga, and it's just worlds apart from this kind of image of like reckless drug use we might sometimes encounter. So most often participants saw taking MDMA to some degree as a couple's thing. And coupledom relies on inhabiting a domain which belongs just to us, you know, just to the couple. And this symbolic territory includes favorite hobbies, pastimes, inside jokes, and for these couples, MDMA. And because MDMA experiences were kind of incorporated within this couples territory, MDMA use became a thing the couples did together and formed part of the fabric of their relationship. Now, bringing MDMA into this exclusive couples territory was performed by couples in different ways. Some didn't want anyone else physically present at all when they were taking MDMA with their partner, but the majority of people were kind of content to practice a less visible exclusion. So, other people could be around, but their partner had to be there too, and they generally spent the majority of the night with their own partner. And the reasons for this kind of separation from others seem to be that MDMA provided really, really fun experiences, and the couples want to enjoy them together. And also because of the emotional potency of MDMA experiences, they really wanted to harness the kind of benefits of these for the couple alone, as you can see, from Ken's quote here. When interpreting these findings, it's important to keep in mind a few things. So all the people that I spoke to, they were still with their partner, and that was due to the methodologies that I used. And it's possible that this might have positively influenced their recollections of their experiences of MDMA, and further research definitely needs to be performed with individuals who are no longer with the partner they're taken MDMA with, to see if there is a difference there. There was also a lack of diversity in this sample. And in some ways, this is representative of MDMA users, but the lack of diversity, particularly with sexuality, is not representative. And indeed, you might expect, a sample that had more same-sex couples, they might experience emotional attunement differently and the value of it differently, because gender seems to play such a big factor. Many of the participants were recruited online, as I mentioned earlier. Now, it's possible people using websites related to drug use might be more aware of both the effects of MDMA and steps to reduce harm, and this might distinguish them from MDMA users as a whole. So about 10 of the 28 participants were recruited from harm reduction websites. So what does it all mean? What can we kind of deduce from this? So these findings alert us, I think, to more messy forms of emotional harm than have been kind of considered in the literature before. And perhaps as part of harm reduction measures, actually users could be made more aware that they're likely to feel very open on MDMA. They might not, have the same kind of constraints they're used to into sharing feelings, and just to be mindful about what they are sharing. And this really goes for couples and friendships as well. These findings could also be of interest to researchers who might want to perform a trial of MDMA-assisted couples therapy, as MDMA did seem to open up new kind of pathways of communication between couples, which could last outside the drug experiences as well. And in terms of policy, I think what these findings show us is that there's a more kind of well-rounded view of the kind of pleasures and the harms of MDMA use, and that this could be better reflected perhaps in a more holistic drug policy, which kind of sees both sides of the coin, the benefits as well as the constraints of recognizing them both. So what we already know is the consumption of different drugs in different contexts transforms individual behavior and transforms individual practices. I think the big contribution that this study makes is that the consumption of one drug in particular, MDMA, also transforms relational practices and relational behaviors. For example, communication is facilitated between couples by the emotional bubble, the safe haven that MDMA can provide. But what I really want to leave you with is that these experiences had an impact long after the MDMA had worn off. Couples weren't just having a quick high, or those experiences were fun, and then, just forgetting about it. These experiences changed how they related to each other and formed part of the things the couples shared together, weaving into their relationship. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Katie. That was a fantastic presentation on a very under-researched research topic. So thanks very much for sharing your findings with us today. What we'd like to do now, people can stay sort of in the background if they prefer that, but if you would like to come and put your camera on for the discussion, that would be quite useful, so we can see you, and it's just a lot nicer for the presenter as well to see the people that are asking the question. So if you'd like to do that now, you can. If not, you can just stay in the background, and if you have a question or a comment for Katie, you can use the question and answer, the Q&A down at the bottom, and just type in those comments and questions. So if we look at those first, Katie, we've got a question from Yanni Pestani, who asked about were all of the couples monogamous? It would be interesting to examine non-monogamous couples in the future, given their increased emphasis on an open and honest communication to make an ethical, non-monogamous relationship situation work. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great. Okay. If you would like to respond, Katie.
Sure, yeah. Great question, Yanni. Yeah, so I didn't explicitly exclude non-monogamous couples. I think just because I was already looking at a subgroup, couples who take MDMA, and then a subgroup within a subgroup, non-monogamous couples who take MDMA. It was just, yeah, very hard to find anyone. But I agree, I think it would be incredibly interesting. And I think, I mean, you're right, yeah, like the whole ethical non-monogamy movement is built on open, honest communication. That's what it's founded on. So I can see MDMA having particularly kind of positive benefits for that, and allowing couples to talk about, I mean, perhaps not infidelity, but yeah, their feelings for others, or how they want to manage particularly the boundaries in their own relationship. That's something I know is can be quite fraught in non-monogamy and needs to be negotiated quite carefully. So perhaps, yeah, MDMA might be able to do that.
Okay, thanks very much, Katie. Yanni's just saying that he doesn't have an option to turn on the camera. Did you want to come in, Yanni? No. Let's just go to the next question. Raj has asked, did any of them ever have a history of mixing MDMA with LSD?
Casting my mind back now, I think I know that some of them have definitely taken other psychedelic drugs. I'm not sure specifically LSD. In terms of mixing them, yeah, I don't think so. It was not something that anyone ever spoke to me about, possibly, but yeah, it didn't come up in the interviews.
Okay, thanks. I had a question, Katie, and I was interested really in the different settings that you used in the research. And you mentioned there was sort of the club dance sort of setting, and then there was the outdoor setting, and then there was the home setting. And it just struck me, these are very different spaces, as you talked about. And I just wondered, you know, they seem to offer different meanings or different things to the participants, these different settings, because sometimes there's an interaction with others, other times there's this sort of exploration of new things and fun, and then there's that very private, intimate sort of space of being in the home. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that and maybe some of those differences.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, you know, when I was talking about the kind of playfulness, yeah, for that, it wasn't really, you know, indoors, outdoors. It just had to be a setting where they were encountering lots of things. Like no one ever spoke about that, that sort of playfulness in the context of being in a club, for example. Yeah, because I guess the focus is mainly on sort of dancing. It's interesting because so the kind of home settings, that tended to be the space where people prepared the most. They put the most kind of effort into that space. So they really, you know, you could see when Carrie was talking about it, you know, cleaning her home, and for someone else say, you know, they orchestrated a playlist, they, you know, like put tapestries up, they decorate. It was, you know, really sort of quite involved process. And I think that allowed them to have perhaps greater control over the atmosphere in that space. And it could also link with, the kind of disclosure element as well. I remember one of the participants saying he was going to have someone over who had never taken MDMA before. And yeah, he'd orchestrated this playlist. He'd also, written down like potential topics of conversation just to make sure that the evening kind of flowed as best as possible. So just so much kind of work and effort going into these experiences. It was quite amazing.
That sounds very interesting, and I can see that kind of control in that space in the home, whereas you don't know what's going to happen in those more public settings. There's all sorts of different encounters that could have happened. We've got some more questions, sorry, in the chat. Brett has asked, do you think that the general public's perception of MDMA and other psychoactive substances will ever change, or has it already from your research?
It's a very optimistic question. Thank you, Brett. I think the perception has begun to change, even from, if I think about at the start of my PhD, which was 2013, to now we are, sort of 8 years later. I think things have changed a lot. At the start of my PhD, I very rarely read anything in mainstream media about drug use. It was sort of more in kind of subcultures, underground. Whereas now I feel like every other week I'm seeing something about some new study that someone's conducting. And I think all these, particularly the kind of the controlled trials that are going on with all of these substances, actually, they're the most advanced one is MDMA for PTSD. I think that is really beginning to change people's perceptions of what these drugs are and what they can do, and actually the massive amounts of suffering that could potentially alleviate.
Excellent, thanks very much. The next question is from Andrea, who says, do you see a future use in private informed settings or combined with therapeutic follow-ups?
Yeah, I wonder the same question myself. I mean, definitely I see therapeutic use will happen. And I think it will happen in States quite soon. In terms of, individuals being able to use it privately, I think in the UK, we are still quite a long way from that point. I think the dial of the discussion hasn't been sufficiently moved. We're just about opening up to the idea to possibly giving people like medical marijuana. I just think the discourses of the war on drugs are so entrenched in our society and other societies. I don't see it happening soon. Maybe, I don't want to put a number on it. Maybe in the future, but I think, not at this point in time.
Katie, did you say at the beginning that some of the states are considering medical use? Is that what you said?
So obviously there's some US states. Do you mean on MDMA?
Yes.
Yeah. So the most kind of advanced research that we have on any of the kind of psychedelic drugs is MDMA for PTSD, and they're in their third and final phase at the moment. And so it should be kind of federally approved treatment in the next 2 years, I think, for PTSD, which is a massive breakthrough for a drug which is currently classed as has no medicinal use, and has, the research has been banned for decades.
And that would be across the whole of the United States, not state by state, or?
My understanding is it would be on a federal level. Whereas the different states can vote on things, and I know different states are voting on things like psilocybin. I don't know if I think there might be one state, is it Oregon, in the US that have got like psilocybin treatment clinics, and they're kind of opening those up. I think that MDMA would be on a federal level of approval.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question from Camille. Was there any discussion around how often the participants used and how this may have affected their experiences?
Yeah, really interesting question. Yes, they did talk about how often they used. Yeah, I mean, as a heuristic, so there were some couples who their use was quite contained. So I remember one couple, they said, oh yeah, we only take it like 3-4 times a year. I think they take it 4 times a year with the changing of the seasons. And they were quite sort of clear about that. And they seem to have, quite productive experiences around it. Another couples that I spoke to had only taken it kind of 3-4, a handful of times, and then they stopped using it. They also seem to have quite good experiences from it. Now, there are a couple of couples who, took it, or a few couples actually, who took it a lot, like very sort of high usage. I can't put an exact figure on it, but it would be like every couple of weeks at least for sort of years and years. And I think you could see perhaps some of the more kind of negative consequences coming through that use. There wasn't a clearly divided line. There were some people who, their use kind of fluctuated as well over time.
Excellent, thank you. Yanni's got another question. This is about, did any of the participants talk about using MDMA to save struggling relationships? I don't think there is official research on this, but I have read of MDMA producing a veneer of improvement that was later undermined.
Yeah, an interesting question. I don't think they used it for that purpose. I think they used it sometimes because they felt like they wanted to, one couple in particular I'm thinking of, they wanted to work on their relationship. They knew there was kind of issues there. In fact, one of the things they were kind of having some friction over was non-monogamy, the potential of opening up their relationship. And they wanted to use MDMA to kind of facilitate those conversations. But I don't think the intention ever was to save the relationship. They didn't think that the relationship was failing. They just wanted to talk about this stuff. I haven't seen any research on that either that I'm aware of. I don't think MDMA is going to be some magic pill to save your relationship. I remember a journalist desperate to like quote me on this a while ago, and I was like, no, I just I don't think it's possible. I think what it might do is perhaps help you work through and maybe separate on a kind of in a more amiable setting, perhaps.
Thanks, Katie. There's a question from Unity, and she asks, is there much research on MDMA-assisted couples therapy? Do you think that MDMA-assisted therapy could also be useful for trauma therapy? So 2 questions there.
Yeah, great questions again. Is there much research? The short answer is no, almost none. I'm aware of one study, which I haven't seen any results from, that was looking at MDMA-assisted couples therapy where one of the partners has PTSD. So I don't know the results of that. But the thing with MDMA-assisted couples therapy, at least in the States, and I think it's the same in the UK as well, you can only use a pharmacological substance if there is some kind of disorder, right? Some kind of clinical problem. So we couldn't legally, you wouldn't be able to get a trial through here for couples who were struggling because that's not a clinical disorder. One of the members of the couple would need to have, maybe alcohol use disorder or PTSD or depression or something like that. But for those couples, I could potentially, see it being very helpful from the research that I've done. But obviously, controlled trials would need to substantiate that.
Thanks, Katie. Betsy's asked a question. The effects described in an early slide seemed very similar to the disinhibiting effects of alcohol. Safe space to reveal more about oneself. Have you come across any similar research on couples drinking together, and how do you think the use of MDMA differs?
So I must admit, I haven't looked at couples alcohol use in very much depth at all. I was mainly focusing on kind of couples and drug use. So yeah, I'm not sure how much the impact would differ. I wonder, just from thinking about the sort of, the effects of alcohol and the effects of MDMA, if there's a distinction in terms of kind of clarity around the experience. So, when couples might take alcohol together, yeah, similar, they would have fun, they would share stuff, but it's quite I don't know, if you drink too much, you might black out, or I don't know, you kind of lose track of the experience. You don't remember precisely what is said. But I think there's more of a clarity when I was speaking to people about their MDMA experiences. They could really remember what had gone on, and yeah, different, I'm not putting this very well. It's like a sense of losing inhibitions, but still retaining complete control to some degree. I think that's perhaps the difference with MDMA than with alcohol. There's more of a loss of control with alcohol.
That's very interesting. We've got another question from Unity. Did any of the participants report polydrug use?
Yeah. So I would say almost all. And you often find this, with studies of recreational users. It's just not possible to find people who've only taken MDMA, only taken psychedelics, only taken, cannabis. I think most of the polydrug use was kind of cannabis, occasional use of psychedelics. There were some couples, so one couple in particular, the same couple who kind of wanted to take MDMA and talk about non-monogamy in their relationship. They only took MDMA and they didn't take other drugs. But yeah, it's quite common. Not necessarily mixing at the time, but yeah, you've had marijuana at some point, or you might like to take that as well.
Thanks, Katie. Rachel has a question. She says, really fascinating research. I was interested in the idea of including harm reduction messages about the potential for MDMA to not just focus on the physical effects, but also the emotional ones, disclosures which are then regretted. Any idea about how that could be put into practice?
Oh, yeah, tricky question. Yeah, my only thought around this is in a slightly more informal way, to be honest. I feel like a great route into this is, so I mentioned I recruited quite a few people from harm reduction sites. Now, these harm reduction sites are a great resource. There's one in particular called RollSafe. I thought it's such a good site. Breaks down everything to do with dosage, to do with things you should look out for, all sorts of things. And yeah, it's prompted me, actually, your question, to think maybe I should get in touch with the guy who runs that site and perhaps put something on there just to make people aware of that, because yeah, it doesn't ever seem to come up, but it is potentially it could potentially be quite a sort of distressing thing if you felt like especially if you went with people that you knew very well and you thought, oh God, just sort of spilled my guts to these people. So yeah, that's one kind of more informal way, but very interested to hear any ideas that you have as well, Rachel.
That's great. I'm sure Rachel will contact you if she's got some more ideas about that. But getting in touch with that website sounds like the RollSafe website sounds like a really good idea, because I'm sure they'd be interested in the findings. I think we just have time for one more question. Barbara asks, have you heard of other research that includes same-sex or queer couples?
For MDMA use, no, I haven't. I mean, yeah, there's just such little research. So I think, three other studies that I know, the study that I've just done, and no, and it was a shame that I couldn't recruit any same-sex couples, because I think, yeah, they might have had quite a different experience, possibly. I think that would be a really sort of good avenue for future research.
Excellent, thank you. I just had one question to add, really around the methodology and the idea that you did couple interviews. And I just wondered, did you sort of decide consciously that you wouldn't do individual interviews with them as well? Was there a reason for just doing the couple interviews? And I guess whether you feel you would have got different information if you had interviewed them on their own.
Yeah, this is something that I puzzled over for quite some time, over how to do this. And I think part of it was that I was prioritizing the couple interview because I thought that that is going to give me most of what I want. Like, those dynamics are so important. And you didn't see it so much in the quotes that I used, but you got these beautiful kind of stories that were really told as a unit between the couples, and you know, someone would say something, someone would butt in and be like, that's not how it happened, this is how it happened. Just, you know, it was really, really great. And you wouldn't have got that with individual interviews. But it was also pragmatic as well. Like, I'm kind of asking quite a lot from these couples. I'm not able to offer any incentive. So to kind of ask them to do a couple interview and then individual interviews felt like quite a sort of, a heavy undertaking. But yeah, I wanted to capture that perspective. So that's why I did the diaries as well.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's just something I was thinking about, that, you know, if that was, you know, that you consciously made that decision not to do those individual interviews. So I think we've just got people coming into the chat now. Raj left as well. He had to go, but saying that it was a great presentation, and thank you for the presentation. I think my final job is to thank you very much for presenting, and to thank everybody for coming along to this first webinar in our series. We have our next seminar on the 17th of February, and we have Claire Amelia looking at construction surrounding alcohol use. So we hope to see everybody there. We hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you at one of our webinars again very soon. Take care, everybody.